Somaliland Finance Minister Said Ali Shire announced on Saturday that Ethiopia has lost its stake on the port of Berbera after it failed to meet conditions that included requirements to contribute the reconstruction of the port. Additionally, the Ethiopian government failed to build a 260-kilometer road that would connect Ethiopia to the port. The port was expected to play a critical role in a maritime connection between the Horn of Africa and the Middle East and reduce Ethiopia's dependence on Djibouti port. The autonomous Somaliland and the Ethiopian government partnered with DP World and the government of United Arab Emirates to build the port in 2017, with Ethiopia enjoying 90% stake. This comes as a major blow to Ethiopia. The expansion to the Berbera port was part of Ethiopia's 10-year logistics strategy and considered essential to support the country's rapid economic growth that has shown a sharp drop since the start of the war on Tigray. The Commission of Human Rights on Ethiopia, mandated by the UN Human Rights Council in December of 2021, has appointed a new chairperson. Kera Betty Murungi, a Kenyan national, was appointed following the resignation of Fatu Bensouda, who resigned following her appointment as Gambia's High Commissioner to the United Kingdom. Bensouda and Murungi were appointed along with Steve Ranter in March of 2021. The president of the Human Rights Council is expected to announce its newest member over the coming few days. The government of Tigray welcomed the establishment of the Human Rights Commission, while the Ethiopian government has continued to block the international media outlets and human rights groups from across the world. For more, Abel Tsagawu has the details.
The President of UN's Human Rights Council has appointed Keria Betty Muringi as a new chairperson to the Commission of Human Rights on Ethiopia, following the resignation of former chairperson Fatawa Bensouda, who resigned from the Commission following her appointment as Gambia's High Commissioner to the United Kingdom. The new chairperson for the Commission, Keria Betty Muringi, was appointed to the Commission along with Bensouda in March of 2021, along with Steve Ranter, a college professor at Michigan University, with a focus on humanitarian law and accountability for human rights violations. Muringi, a citizen of Kenya, is by profession a lawyer who has served in different regional and international practice such as Women's Initiative for Gender Justice, Sierra Leone Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and Kenya Human Rights Commission. She also served as Senior Transitional Justice Advisor in South Sudan and as Africa's representative on the board of directors of the Trust Fund for Victims at the International Criminal Court from 2010 to 2013. On December 17, 2021, the United Nations Human Rights Council held its 33rd special session on the gross violation of human rights in Ethiopia. The Council discussed and passed a resolution that called for the formation of a new international investigative team composed of 3 human rights experts, all appointed by the President of the UNHRC to report on the rights abuses and violations in Ethiopia starting from November 3, 2020. With the resignation of Bensouda, the President of UN's Human Rights Council is expected to appoint a 3rd human rights expert to the Human Rights Commission over the coming days. The government of Tigray issued a statement on December 18, 2021, welcoming the decision by the UN Human Rights Council to conduct an impartial investigation and announced that it will be establishing a body tasked with the responsibility of cooperating with the Commission as the Ethiopian government has continued to deny access to international human rights groups and media, including the UN Mandate Commission of Human Rights Experts. The Commission is scheduled to deliver its first update on 30 June 2022, while no commission have yet to visit and conduct investigation inside Tigray.
Sexual violence inflicted on women and girls in Tigray during the period of occupation has left many devastated. Our reporters visit housing in southeastern Tigray, where they met with a woman that was raped just days after giving birth and lost her husband at the hands of the same forces. For more, Salome Taklai has the details.
Sexual violence was rampant during the first 8 months of the conflict, when Ethiopian and Eritrean forces had occupied much of Tigray. Women and girls were raped, gang-raped, held in sexual slavery, and told this was being done to them to cleanse their Tigrayan bloodline. We met one survivor from housing in eastern Tigray. She says Eritrean troops raided her home after taking control of the city and raped her, her underage sister, and her pregnant sister-in-law.
I had given birth just days earlier. I gave birth on the 22nd of November. They came to rape me on the 25th. We couldn't leave housing after the Eritreans came, so me and my husband, his pregnant sister, and my 17-year-old sister stayed at home.
She says they first asked her husband if he was a combatant, but after he explained that he wasn't, they didn't believe him and bit him anyways. She says they took all the money that they could find in the house before they killed her husband, at which point she had lost consciousness.
They asked my husband if he was a member of the Tigrayan forces. He said he wasn't, but they said they didn't believe him and beat him. They told me to sit and sent my husband outside. There were so many of them. Some were searching the house. They took 40,000 birr. Minutes later, I heard a gunshot and realized they had killed my husband. I lost consciousness after that. The first thing I remember after regaining my consciousness is my sister lying on the ground and the house looking like a mess.
The survivor says the soldiers had also tried to kill her daughter, that was just 3 days old at the time. She says the troops put their foot on the child and pulled at her umbilical cord. She says her daughter lost a lot of blood at the time, but hasn't been able to get medical treatment.
I had given birth only days earlier, so her umbilical cord had not healed. They stepped on her and dragged her by the umbilical cord. There was so much blood. There was no hospital I could take her to. All I could do is hold her and cry. I thought she would die, but she's still alive, but I don't know about the condition of her health. I'm always scared she may get sick again and die.
The denial of basic healthcare services to mothers and children has exasperated the plight of women and girls in Tigray that have faced unspeakable violence at the hands of invading forces, a healthcare system that is growing weaker by the day as the Ethiopian government continues to withhold vital services and block medical supplies.
Earlier this week, the Special Rapporteur on Human Rights issued his latest report, where he said the human rights condition in Eritrea has actually deteriorated since the start of the war on Tigray. The rapporteur said the national service program that he called the main source of human rights violation in the country has intensified, with children as young as 12 years old being dragged into national service, and refugees and many youngsters being forced into the battlefield after receiving very minimal to no military training. But for many that knew the human rights condition in Eritrea before the war in Tigray, they would tell you it would have been difficult or even impossible to imagine it getting it any worse. Savlor Glama looks back at the condition in Eritrea before the war and the hell Eritrea had become for its citizens over the past few decades.
Eritrea, even before the start of the war on Tigray, is known as being one of the most repressive states on the planet. Forced and indefinite national service, coupled with lack of constitution, or really any mechanism to check government officials or seek justice, had turned Eritrea into a living hell for its citizens. The National Service Program, identified by human rights groups as the main source of human rights violations in the country, was first introduced in the country as the Warsa Yika'alo Development Campaign in 2001. The program required all high school students to complete their education in Warsa Yika'alo Secondary School in the Sawa military camp and would, side by side, receive military training. While initially national service was only required for 18 months, the government would later extend this to indefinite national service, claiming it was necessary in light of a threat of invasion from neighboring countries.
They took us to Sawa, but after 2 days in Sawa, they were gathering up women from everywhere. They took us to farms. So I went to 3 or 4 different farms just working the fields. We would plant, weed, do a bit of everything, and throughout our work our guards would make deals with other generals who had farms nearby, so they would take us there, do the work, and take the money, I guess. Throughout our stay in these different farms, there were many women who were either threatened or were asked for sexual favors in exchange for cell phones, a phone call, in exchange for water, in exchange for pads, menstrual pads, for anything.
It's not our own making. It's not been our own choice. We never wanted to go this way. It's been imposed upon us, and we have to survive and live with it. It's not a question of national service or avoiding the national service. You aspire to become someone in this society and have good quality life. You work for that. You don't get it free. People learn it either the easy way or the hard way.
The indefinite national service in Eritrea would lead to an exodus of youth from the country. Hundreds of thousands of young people would flee Eritrea over the course of just 2 decades, draining the country of its youth and dimming its future.
They forced us to discontinue our education and pulled us into national service. They told us it was our national obligation. We were made part of the military and turned into slaves. We have to do everything they tell us. At a certain point, it becomes unbearable for most of the recruiters, and they flee Eritrea.
It's wrong to think that this country is missing out because these people have left. They cannot in any way affect our work. Some may think they've weakened us, but really, having people like that on your team is burdensome.
The situation would be further exasperated by the lack of even the most basic institutions for the protection of human rights. For 3 decades, Eritrea had no constitution, no courts, no parliament, and no elections, and has been led by one man since it declared its independence from Ethiopia. Youth attempting to escape indefinite national service would be arrested and held for years without even having seen a court date.
ማለት ብዘረባ ተዛሪቦም ከማንሲ ልዕሊ 20 ዓመት ድገበሩ ተኣስሩ ኣለዉ ካልኦት ብዙሕ ነገራት አሉ ሕጂ ንዓይ ክሳብ ናይ ሞት ዕድስ መጋጠመን ነይሩ ማለት እዩ
Perhaps unimaginable for most, the special rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Eritrea says the situation has become even more horrid. In its most recent report, the rapporteur tells the Human Rights Council that the war on Tigray has further deteriorated human rights conditions in Eritrea, saying the war has compounded human rights challenged in Eritrea and reinforced pre-existing patterns of human rights violations. The National Services Program has further intensified, with the government now forcibly conscripting children as young as 12 and people as old as 70, while children as young as 16 were being forcibly taken into active combat, with very limited, if any, military training, with many young people being forced to partake in the war on Tigray under the threat of severe punishment to themselves and their families. According to the report, draft evaders or deserters are routinely punished with arbitrary detention in highly punitive conditions and often subjected to torture and inhumane or degrading treatment, and extrajudicial killings of conscripts when they try to escape from Tigray or from training centers in Eritrea. The report said parents of conscripts were detained to coherence conscripts into serving in the military, and failure to respond to a conscription notice by a member of the family would result in the denial of food coupons for the entire family. The report said that the forced conscription of children has affected the moral and motivation of young Eritreans and had resulted in a severe brain drain in the country. The situation has also generated additional challenges for the quality and availability of basic services, including access to health and education. The rapporteur also highlighted persistent challenges in the protection of Eritrean refugees in Ethiopia and said many had been forcibly taken to Eritrea and later forced to return to Tigray as soldiers to take part in active combat. The Eritrean government for decades has been a source of instability and mayhem in East Africa, from funding terrorist organizations like Al-Shabaab, its oppressive nature that has resulted in more than 500,000 fleeing the country, and finally its invasion of Tigray and gross violations of human rights committed by its forces on civilians. Assistant Professor Merasa Tsahaye, a political analyst at Maqala University, says the stability and democratization of the Eritrean state is an important prerequisite for peace and stability in the Horn of Africa.
The failure of democracy in Eritrea, the problem of nation building and state formation in Eritrea becomes a problem to Tigray and the Horn. So Eritrea becomes a problem in the regional security complex. And the international community should actively support Tigray's cause as well as the cause of the democratic force of Eritrea. So the international community has a responsibility to play its role in this regional security framework.
For decades, the Eritrean regime has been a source of instability and violence in the Horn of Africa. Youth have been forced to flee their country to escape the inferno the Eritrean government has turned into a status quo. The only question that remains unanswered: if the world will continue to remain silent as Eritreans continue to suffer in silence and international borders are disregarded with impunity.
We visited an IDP camp in Tigray, one of the 4 in a small town where more than 60,000 are sheltered. But many have not been able to access humanitarian assistance for at least a year. This has led horrific stories in the IDP camps, especially for the most vulnerable children and mothers. We met Desta in the IDP camp in Tigray. Desta lost his wife, Tsaga Kahsai, who died due to lack of food and medical attention, leaving him and their only 40 days old daughter behind. Tsaga's friends have been assisting him and his daughter so far, but they say there is only so much more they can do if humanitarian assistance is not able to reach those that need it most. For more, Haile Gabru has the details.
Tsaga Kahsai was one of the millions to be displaced from Western Tigray at the outset of the war in 2020. Her and her husband, Desta, were displaced from Setit Humura. Their friends tell us Tsaga owned a cafeteria and had stable income until the start of the war in November that forced her and her husband to abandon their home. Months after they arrived, Tsaga learned she was pregnant. She would carry her child to term, but would die 40 days later because owing to lack of food and medication.
Tsaga told me she left all her belongings in Humera when they left. I told her the same had happened to us when we left Zalambisa. She told me she had a stable life in Humera, but here we have nothing to eat. There is nothing to eat. Tsaga starved to death.
I knew Tsaga from back in Setit Humera, when she owned and ran her own cafeteria. While she was working on her own cafeteria and her husband owned a barber shop. They had a stable life and income. She gave birth here, she lost a lot of blood, and there wasn't much food or medication. We were able to collect food from neighbors and keep her alive for 4 passed away.
Tsaga's husband says it's been difficult to care for his daughter since Tsaga's passing, and
we have nothing to give to the child. No one has anything to spare. As you can see, she's caring for the child. She uses what little we bring her. That's only enough to keep the child alive. The world has to help us though, for the sake of this little child.
Asmelash Hadush, head of Social Affairs Office in Tigray, says Tsaga's story is just one of the dozens. He says there are more than 64,000 IDPs in Tigray, many of whom have received little or no aid since the start of the siege in June of 2021.
We have 4 IDP centers in Tigray, sheltering 64,645 internal displaced persons. Most are from Western Tigray. The amount of aid that is needed and the amount that is reaching Tigray is unmatched. The humanitarian crisis is beyond our capacity. We fear that many will perish if food and medication is not able to reach Tigray.
For close 1 year now, the people of Tigray have been living under a complete blockade, with the Ethiopian government blocking all commercial routes, food aid, fuel and vital services such as banking and telecommunication. The blockade has led to starvation, with more than 6.5 million people said to be in urgent need of humanitarian assistance. Just 20% of that assistance has been able to reach Tigray since the Ethiopian government declared a humanitarian truce at the end of March.
The Ethiopian government declared a humanitarian truce at the end of March, but months later, only about 20% of the much-needed aid has been able to reach many in need. We met Haji Ahmed Mohammed Maghala. Haji Ahmed was a resident of Saudi Arabia, but moved to Tigray months ahead of the start of the conflict. He says he had started a chicken farm that he had managed to make profit within months. But following the start of the conflict, he was forced to close his farm, and today he finds himself on the brink and unable to feed himself or support people in his community he knows are in desperate need. For more, Miruna Mana has the details.
Haj Ahmed Muhammad is a resident of Ma'ala. Haj Ahmed had moved to Tigray from Saudi and opened a chicken farm that had become profitable within a short span of time. But as soon as the war started, things would change dramatically, and he wouldn't even be able to feed his chicken, forcing him to close the shop.
When we moved her from Saudi Arabia, they gave us land for investment. I bought chicken and started running a chicken farm. After 3 or 4 months, the farm started to be profitable. We lived comfortably for a while, but then the war started and we didn't know where to go or what to do.
Soon enough, the losses would be too large for him to keep running his farm, and he was forced to switch to smaller business.
I quit the chicken farm because I could no longer feed the chicken. Then I opened this small shop here with what little money I had left. But even then I couldn't buy much for the shop, even things like food or drinks.
Haj Ahmed says that however difficult his situation, he says he's devastated to see the living condition of many members of his community. Every day, he says, conditions are getting worse.
Countless are dying of hunger. You go to the hospital, you can't find medication or get treatment. Even doctors themselves are dying due to hunger. Infants die right after they're born, just because there's no oxygen in the hospital. Our neighbor, a girl named Saida, was found dead. She died of starvation.
Haj Ahmed says he's afraid that if the world can't help the most vulnerable, that many may lose their lives, and soon.
الشعب التجراي يبغى مساعدة من الأمم المتحدة.
Countless people are dying, and I know I'll be next. We have nothing to eat or drink. Every day we are afraid we may die. The people of Tigray need help. The UN, human rights groups. Aren't we all creatures of God?
The humanitarian truce declared in late March has led to delivery of just 20% of much-needed humanitarian assistance, as vital services that could ease humanitarian crises, like banking services and telecommunication, remain blocked by the Ethiopian government.
Serena Muluburhan is just 4 years old. She says she learned to play tennis where she was just 2 years old and has dreamt of being as successful as her namesake, Serena Williams, ever since. But the siege on Tigray has made it difficult for Serena to pursue her dreams with the same intensity as she had before. Our reporter Winta Kirana met with Serena and her father, who says she is as eager as ever to live her dreams. Let's take a look at Winter's report.
Serena Muluburhan is just 4 years old, and like the legendary tennis player she is named after, Serena is an exceptionally talented tennis player. Serena says her father taught her how to play the game when she was just 2 years old, and she says she loves the game and hopes to be a professional athlete someday.
Playing tennis makes me happy. My dad taught me how to play. I was 2 years old when I started playing tennis. This is a racket and it's used to hit balls. My father and Coach Stefanos are coaching me. I want to be a professional tennis player when I grow up. I want to be just like Serena Williams and win as many games.
But Serena has not been able to continue her training as intensely as she did before of the start of the siege on Tigray. Serena's racket is broken and she has not been able to replace it. And she says she's not able to go to the court because her family's car no longer has fuel. But even more devastating is that despite being 4 years old, Serena is yet to attend any schooling.
I've never been to school, but my father tutors me. I'm short of a lot of things. My racket is broken. It was the only one I had. I'm not eating as much eggs and milks as I used to, so I'm not able to keep fit. And I can't come here anymore because my father says our car doesn't have fuel to bring me here.
Muluburhan Gabrahiwat, Serena's father, was a sport teacher and said he had always wanted to teach his children tennis, but didn't expect that his daughter would be so talented.
I had always wanted to teach my children tennis. I named my daughter after Serena, so it can motivate her to the best. She started playing when she was just 2 years old. Her performance is amazing. She surprised me every time.
Mulubrahan says while Serena is exceptionally talented, he says he fears that the prolonged effects of the war on Tigray may hold back from living her dreams.
አዲስ አበባ ላይ ተወሊዳ ስጋ 2 ዓመትን ታሽሙን 2 ዓመትን ፈርዓና ካብ ዝኾነ አዲስ አበባ ኢና ነርና
We used to line in Addis Ababa, but we came here because it was difficult for us there as Tigrayanis. And after we came here, the war broke out, and the siege followed. And now, there's just very little room for talented children like Serena to grow.
Millions of children in Tigray, just like Serena, are finding it difficult to access education and other basics they will need to ensure a healthy and successful future. But luckily, hope is the one commodity amongst children in Tigray that's in short supply.
Dear Serena Williams, I love you. I hope one day I'll get the chance to meet you. And I'm working hard just as you did.
As a means of assisting the most vulnerable members of the community, local charity organization Keridin has been organizing breakfast feeding program for children here in Maqala. Our reporter visited the site to find medical doctors that had taken this opportunity to provide free screening and treatment for children suffering from scabies and other communicable diseases that have now become difficult to control in light of the near-complete collapse of Tigray's health system. For more, Kubro Moldabrahan reports.
A year-long blockade on food aid and vital services, such as telecommunication and banking, has left many in Tigray desperate for essentials, even food. One way communities in Maqala have been supporting one another is through breakfast feeding programs for children. Keradion Charity Organization is just one of a few local charity organizations collecting funds as little as 1 birr to organize a daily breakfast feeding program here in Maqala. Every morning, 200 children gather near the Asr Shadishak Abili Commercial Bank to receive just 1 bread and a cup of tea, very likely the only meal they will have that day.
We have more than 200 children that we feed breakfast on daily basis, and we have orphans that we help, and we have IDPs, which all of this comes from the community itself. So the challenges are tremendous, and the price of food has skyrocketed. As you know, the price of bread right now is very, very high. It's unaffordable. So all of those things are the challenge. These are the main challenges, but the challenges are, you cannot count them. There are so many.
But other charity organizations also take these opportunities to provide other badly needed services. Dr. Sofonas Malaku is the founder and CEO of Ma'adut Charity Organization. His charity is providing free screening and treatment for IDPs and children suffering from communicable diseases. Him and other doctors from Ma'adut have gathered here this morning to provide free screening and treatment for children that are suffering from scabies and other communicable diseases.
Today our focus is primarily on a disease called scabies. And it's one of the communicable, it's a highly contagious infectious skin disease, and it's caused by a parasitic agent called Coxella labyrinthe. When it comes to conditions like the ones that we are facing right now, the siege, the war, the lack of food, the lack of sanitation materials and lack of hygiene materials, you deal with complicated cases of scabies. One of the challenges that you face with this disease is that since it's very irritating and itching, the children, they scratch the lesions, the skin lesions. So there are no hygiene materials. You can expect what they are doing when they do that. They introduce other pathogens into the lesion. And you deal with a variant called super-infected scabies. To manage that, you will need antibiotics, which we don't have currently in abundance. So today, our primary aim is to sort out the case that we can manage, and give them whatever available medications that we do have. And as part of the assessment, we're looking for other infectious diseases that we may seek out.
I always come here to eat breakfast. Today, I'm also getting treatment. I have been suffering with this condition for the past year. I'm always scratching my thigh and my arms, especially at night.
Dr. Sofonas says scabies is actually an easily treatable communicable disease, had it not been for the destruction of almost 80% of health facilities in Tigray. He says the near-complete collapse of the health system, in addition to the siege that has discontinued banking and other vital services, has made it impossible for patients to seek care or maintain basic hygiene.
I've been scratching my skin for almost 3 months now. Even though I knew I had scabies, I didn't know where to get the medication.
Dr. Sofonas and Ashannafi tell us that the work of charity organizations such as theirs falls far short of the intervention needed to address the humanitarian catastrophe on the ground. They say the world has to do more to ensure that the most vulnerable members of community have access to basics such as food, soap, and medication.
The siege is not able to stop, a lot of issues, ensuing issues are not going to be solved. Like banking, the health service, the medications coming in, a lot of the systems within the region. And if that doesn't change, we're going to deal with a lot of issues that will have a lot of ripple effects. And we're going to deal with this for a long time unless it's done early. And I urge the international community to act now. We have to act now because we are losing people.
As a matter of fact, we're standing in front of a bank which has not given service for almost a year now. But many people apparently have money here, but they cannot access it. So many people are suffering because of the war, because of the siege, because of the atrocities that has happened in Tigray, that has been committed in Tigray. So I say onto the international community that they have to do whatever they can as quick as possible because we are racing against time right now.
Young girls were not spared from the horrific violence committed on women and girls in Tigray. During their 8 months-long occupation of Tigray, Ethiopian forces would rape, gang rape, and hold women and girls for sexual slavery for days. We met a 16-year-old survivor. She was displaced from Dansha in western Tigray, along with thousands of others. She would travel for days only to find more hardships on the way. Her and her 14 other women would fall into the hands of Ethiopian soldiers that would rape them for days and leave them incontinent.
Members of Amhara Special Forces and Fano.
She says they later killed her friend. They said she was not a virgin and said she had given up her virginity to a junta.
Five of them raped us. They said I was a virgin, but that she wasn't. They killed her for that. They said she'd lost her virginity to junta.
Weeks later, on November 28, Amhara forces would announce that all residents of the town would need to leave the area. They said they had to cross the Takaza River to the east of Tigray and would be killed if they didn't.
They made us leave on November 28th. A truck drove us to the banks of Takaza River. They told us they didn't care if we die or live once we crossed the river. But before we could leave, they took the men that were with us, killed them, and then dumped them into Takaza River. They accused them of being combatants. They just saw how tall they were and their physique and concluded that they were supporters of Wayana. They killed so many, but we got to continue our journey.
The survivor says the hardship would not end there. After crossing the river, they would travel to the town of Dedebit, a town in northwestern Tigray that had at that point of the conflict been completely abandoned due to heavy shelling by Ethiopian and Eritrean forces. There, the survivor and 14 other women would fall into the hands of Ethiopian forces that would rape them for days.
Everyone had left the town. It was completely abandoned. We went to the rural area to find help. There, Ethiopian troops found us. There was 15 of us. They had separated us from the men. Till this day, we don't know what happened to them, if they killed them or if they're still alive. But we saw them beating them. They took us to their camp. They tied us onto a tree outside. And then they took turn raping us. They kept us like that for more than a week. The whole time, they gave us a single biscuit and water using the lid of a bottle. When fighting erupted, they left the area and left us there. Farmers found us tied to the tree and took us to their home.
The survivor tells us her and other victims were left incontinent and bleeding for days. They would be in and out of consciousness, unable to care for themselves.
We couldn't control our urine or the bleeding at the time. They took care of us for some days, but then they would have to leave their homes in the daytime to hide from the troops. So they'd lock us inside their house before they left.
The survivor tells us the farmers would care for her and other women for weeks, but then realizing that they needed medical attention, they would use cart to take them to another town called Maihansa. There, with the help of residents and other displaced persons, they would go go to Shira, the capital of northwestern Tigray. But even there, they wouldn't be able to find any medical assistance. Weeks later, one of the survivors would die trying to terminate her pregnancy using traditional medication.
The women who were here with me were getting traditional medication to terminate their pregnancies. One of them took the medication and died. I think she overdosed. After seeing that, we thought we might be next if we do that, so we stopped.
The systematic destruction of more than 80% of Tigray's health facilities has further exacerbated the condition of survivors in Tigray, many of whom have not only faced excruciating acts of sexual violence, but will have not received the appropriate care since. The survivor tells us that when she finally arrived in Adigrat, she was able to find a hidden one-stop center where medical professionals would give medical treatment to survivors of sexual violence. But she says the professionals had kept the place hidden, afraid of what would unfold if soldiers were to find out of the care that was being given at the facility.
There was a hidden one-stop center there, so we went there. They told me that it was too late to terminate the pregnancy, that it was dangerous for my health, and that they are unable to do anything. I was already more than 6 months pregnant. A pregnant mother isn't supposed to bleed for 9 months, but I bleed for 9 months straight. I was also unable to control my urine. I gave birth. I gave birth from an enemy.
The survivor tells us she is still unable to get the medical attention that is needed, both physical and psychological, due to the ongoing siege. But she asks that the world intervenes and do what it can to support survivors of sexual violence.
The world needs to give attention to survivors. We're losing mothers and patients with chronic illnesses due to lack of medication.
The situation of survivors of sexual violence in Tigray is as dire as it has ever been, where many, even more than a year later, are not able to get the medical treatment they so badly need.